Congratulations, you found the death certificate. But the death certificate says burial location, something nondescript or non existent, like Snow Hill Cemetery. What? Now, what do you do? Congratulations, you found the last enslaver. Now what? After you had that party and you called all your friends and you emailed and you put it on Facebook and you let everybody know, now what do you do? In short, you go deeper. You expand your pool of resources. Hello, welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. I am Shamele Jordon, your host. You can watch us on PhillyCam, YouTube, or Facebook. Today, we have two great quick starts for you. And one of them, if I can get my keyboard to work, one of them is, of course, off the beaten cemetery path. And, this is where Jim and Michael are going to go off. What else do they do? What else is new? And then we have After You Find the Last Enslaver. And today, I'm telling you guys, we have the honor of having a special guest who knows how to go deep. I mean, she has done so many amazing projects. One of them, most notably, is the Alexandria Freedman Cemetery. And she's also one of Alexandria's living legends. So you guys know what to do. If you're out there, let me know where you are. Let us know if you have a genealogy group that you're a member of. Please put that in the chat, because there might be a genealogy soul out there that's looking for a community. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on, you know who they are, my extra special buddies, columnist and editor, Jim Beidler. How are you, Jim?
Reporting for duty.
And blogger, author, genealogy tip of the day, Michael John Neill. How are you?
I'm not reporting for anything, but I'm here.
So, we're talking about cemeteries today. Why should genealogists hang out in cemeteries?
Well, I'll personalize this. I mean, this is where I started my genealogy journey. Was my ancestral church that was only 1 mile away from my ancestral home, and I was helping my mother with a history book for said church. And I famously said to her, I think I'm going to take a trip down to the old graveyard just to see if I can find any little thing at all. Never came back from that graveyard. I was just absolutely entranced by the old German tombstones, wonderfully detailed. I found like 6 new direct line ancestors my first day.
Wow.
Yeah. That's why I've started mainlining this stuff quite not quite 40 years ago. And and I find cemeteries to be very peaceful places. I find them to well, in the words of the 23rd Psalm, to restoreth my soul.
Yes. I love being in cemeteries. There's actually some genealogists who don't like cemeteries. Like, can you be a genealogist and not like cemeteries?
Well, don't attach yourself to such negative people like that.
So, Michael, have you ever had any cool surprises in the cemetery?
Well, like Jim said, there could be things on tombstones that are not on other records, especially when you get to in certain locations and in certain time periods. I did encounter when I was stopping at one on a Thursday and on mid-afternoon, and I drove around the far back to circle out and exit. There was a couple back parked right back where you dump the garbage, and they were not there to look at stones. They were having a mid-afternoon rendezvous. And they looked at me and like I knew who they were. And I just looked at them like I thought. So they thought I knew who they. I didn't know who they were. They thought they'd been caught. I just wanted to get out of there at that point. But I guess like Jim, without getting overly whatever, the thing I sometimes think about when you go to the cemetery is, especially ones I've been to before for funerals, you think of the other times that your people or some of your people have been there and gathered there when somebody was buried. Was buried there. I kind of think of it in that context. When I go to one now that I was at when somebody died, I'm not a kid anymore, and so I kind of view it from that standpoint, like a gathering place in one sense or another.
Yeah, we love to.
I've also seen a few fights in cemeteries too at funerals, but we're not going to go into that.
Oh man, that's a new episode. That's a new episode.
Definitely not for good at people.
That would be on the beating path.
Speaking of titles, we are now going to do our quick start off the beaten cemetery path. All right, so let's go on and get on to step 1, which is to find the cemetery name. So how do you actually do that? Because we all want to know what the cemetery is.
Well, there are the universe of death records, quote unquote, is rather large, because it's everything from newspaper obituaries, which are distinct from newspaper death notices, at least in bygone days. Death notices were paid ads. Obituaries traditionally were free. They're not anymore, but for a good part of 2 centuries they were. Church burial registers, family registers that include mentions of the deaths of the family. Funeral cards, if you have some of them that have come down in the family that list the information. So, there are so many. I mean, this is like the classic example of when somebody tells me, "Oh yeah, I have the death record of my ancestor." You have a death record, a death record, and if you're trying to tell me you have a brick wall, I'm gonna slap a checklist back at you that's gonna make your head spin. And until then, you're not going to tell me that you've got a brick wall. So, and I didn't even mention death certificates, which we're going to have a couple of examples of here in a moment. And one of the things, actually, kind of the genesis of this quick start in my mind was the fact that we kind of have a classic view of cemeteries today, that they're either church affiliated or community or so-called garden cemeteries. Well, there are many private plots too, still on old farms, still on what was an old family farm, but now has gone through many owners. And if you're lucky, the stones haven't been plowed under by some over-energetic farmer. So there, it's not cut and dry, it's going to be the closest cemetery to where my ancestor lived. It could be, many moons away, because it could be somebody who's taken back to their area of origin, even though they've lived in California 20 years, but they grew up in Pennsylvania. Their first husband died in Pennsylvania, and darn well they're not going to waste that burial spot back in Pennsylvania. So,
but apparently they got a better husband in California from the sounds of it. But in addition to the some of the things that Jim talked about, you can look at local old maps. That might be one place to get an idea of where cemeteries are at.
Yep.
If you think they were buried on the farm, you might even want to look and see if the deed references a small part of that was allocated aside for a burial ground. Historical societies are good places to find these things out, because the difficulty is in certain time periods and locations, Jim mentioned newspapers and death certificates and all those fun things, but you get to a certain point in time and there are no death certificates or obituaries or death notices. And so finding out where some of these are at with old maps and local historical societies and things of that type can be a place maybe to get at some of these additional names of cemeteries.
Yep, absolutely. Because and also you're talking about before a newspaper even started, but then there are sometimes gaps in the runs of local newspapers that you have to contend with, so that you have to look around at other, not just. And I'm going to use primary and secondary, none the way we usually use it in genealogy, but your top type of record, your backup record, and then maybe a tertiary type of record till you find information on where a specific person was buried.
So yeah, guys, I'm sorry I have not shown the death certificate because I'm having an issue with sharing my screen. So
okay.
we're going to, here we go. Sorry. I was like losing it.
Well, we were just having too much fun nattering on, so I didn't even notice. But
thank you for not noticing. I was in a complete panic. All right. So we have I love looking at death certificate. That's why I was really in a complete panic. So what do we have here?
Yeah, here, and this is just pretty much randomly from Adams County, Pennsylvania. If you go back to the earlier one, to the first version of this, in the lower right-hand corner, they have boxes regarding the burial information and the undertaker. And here it says Lutheran Cemetery, Abbottstown. And well, that's great, but there might be more than one Lutheran church in Abbottstown. It may have a more formal name like that, like Mount Zion Cemetery, because the church probably has a more specific name. And or it may have had several names over time, because you have some of these congregations
move
that every time there's a new church building, poof, they decide they need a new church name. But I'm kind of anti that. But yeah, so this one, is going to be, it's going to be a church affiliated cemetery, or at least in 1919 it was, because there's also cemeteries that I've seen that have grown together. In Lebanon County, where I used to live, there was a Greenwood Cemetery that was a civil cemetery, or community cemetery, I should call it. And then there was a church cemetery called Ebenezer that grew with it, and another church from in town, Lebanon City, decided to dig up their folk and move them, out to the burbs, so to say. And so it's really 3 cemeteries in one. So you got to be very careful over time.
And knowing your history. That's what knowing your history is all about. You can't just
in some rural places, the church cemeteries have been taken over. And where I live, they've been taken over by the township. And the township, it's the church's cemetery, and that's still the name of it. But the town, you have to contact, if you want to bury somebody there, for example, you have to contact the township, and the township has the record. So, and that makes a good point, that things, as we're going to talk about, can vary from one state to another in terms of access that we'll talk about, and in some cases in terms of maintenance and what the specific laws are in terms of getting there and things of that type. So you want to keep that in mind too.
Yeah, because in Pennsylvania, if a cemetery is quote unquote abandoned, the township.
Are you guys talking about laws? Are you guys like on step 5? Tell me about this death record.
I love the way you gently use your shepherd's crook to get me back in. So well, this is another one from the Adams County area, and this one they say that the burial took place at Mummert's Cemetery, and this suggests that it may well be a private cemetery. It also could be a nickname of of a church congregation. It might be St. John's Mummert's Church. named for the usually named for the founder or who is thought to be the founder. Isn't
Mhm.
always the same.
Mhm.
But again, this is something you're going to have to do. Like Michael says, do some historical research to try to straighten out. What's this darn Mummert all about?
And one place to do that, in addition to the things we've already mentioned, would be do a search of newspapers, whatever that it's. I know if it's Jim, it's someplace in what's it called, Pennsylvania. Do a search of newspapers in that county, that area, for the name of that cemetery. You may find references to it that give you a better feel for where it's at. May even have an alternate name for it or something to give you some context and some background, because the death certificate is not going to always do that.
No, very seldom is really
Right.
going to do that. Yeah.
All right. So we have, death records are probably one of the most popular to find where the cemetery is. Once you have a name, you want to go to step 2. Does the cemetery still exist? So how do you find that out?
Yeah, well, thankfully we have now some really great online databases. Certainly far from complete, but you have things like Find a Grave and Billion Graves that are the closest you're going to get to kind of a one-stop shopping, as a first place to start, because you can search by the particular cemetery as opposed to searching for a name, a personal name. Now, sometimes they are, well, not just sometimes, their parameters are such that if you misspell, you're not going to find it. So,
Right.
so you may have to try
Life isn't
different.
Google.
Yeah, exactly. Because like that Mummerts, which I'm going to inevitably say has 2 M's in the middle, 3 M's total. May well end up with just one M in the middle here.
Mhm.
So you're going to have to try variants. So,
And
but this is a good way to try to go at it.
And one
I
thing
mean,
that if your cemetery, if you know that the cemetery, once you find it and and it's not in one of these places, you should have it added, because I had
Yes.
these cemeteries
Yep.
added, and that was very nice.
Do your part for the larger community. Absolutely.
Yes. All right, you guys ready for step 3, which is to research the cemetery. So how do you go about that?
you could do some of the things we've already talked about in terms of,
Yeah.
I mean, start with a basic Google search. You could do some searches in newspapers. You might even want to do some searches of county histories and things of that type to see if it still exists. Local historical or genealogical societies would be a good option as well. If you've got an idea of where it's at, and maybe it's a little bit large, it's not a small private one that doesn't exist anymore, but if it's a little bit larger perhaps, and you know where it is, you could even reach out to a funeral home or a funeral director in the area, because they will, if it's still in use, they will know who they have to contact if they have to dig a grave there, and that would be the person that would have the records, and that might be a way to get to get some more information for ones that are not or no longer in use. If you know where they're at, you might want to look on a current plat map to see who the adjacent property owners are, and gently, because the thing is, if it's on private property, you're going to have to go through the landowner to access that. And in most states, you're at the discretion of the landowner in terms of whether you can access that or not. So you would need to tread very lightly, because you don't want to put up any red flags or brick walls with and say, "Oh, my great grandpappy's buried there. You're going to let me on that." That's not the way. You're going to get a
You're
little
getting ahead of the quick
start
start again, Michael.
What's that?
You're getting ahead of the quick start
Oh,
again.
is he?
Yeah.
No,
So,
I'm laughing because
Okay.
I was in that position before. Cop
take a
showed up.
taser along.
Cop showed up.
You want to take a soft shoe approach, but
okay, before we get to that point, Michael, time out here. One of the things that genealogy organizations has done very well is cataloging cemeteries.
Woo!
And just about every county in Pennsylvania, at least, I don't know about Illinois, Tucky out there, but it has done some sort of cemetery or field guide locator. And one of the absolute best that I hope that ones who haven't done it yet use as a model is from Columbia County, Pennsylvania, home of Bloomsburg University, and also the Great Bloomsburg Fair in the fall. But this gives the GPS coordinates, gives when it was founded, and this the County Historical and Geological Society then also has companion volumes where they have the inscriptions, and this is where, if you at least know the county, you go to these books, and these are really going to help you a lot. And yes, then you may find it's a private one. Yes, still on private property and not in the family. And that's when everything that Michael was saying comes into play. That the old soft shoe, I believe you were saying.
Right. And the other thing is, even on a basic Google search, that book title should probably come up.
Yeah.
So we kind of laughed about you can't Google everything, but I would be willing to bet that if I typed in whatever that county was, cemetery or what have you, that book title, not the whole book itself, because you might have to, I think it's called pay for it or get it, whatever, but you at least become aware of its existence. And you should. Yep. It also goes back to reaching out to the local historical societies as well. And as was mentioned in the comments, old WPA surveys from
I was going to say that.
Yeah. Those are really good. And you can say, well, they're outdated because they're old, but the advantage to those is that they're old. And things were in existence then that might not be in existence now. So don't just, oh, that's from the 1930s. My grandma wasn't even born then. That's the whole point, is that it might reference something that's not in existence today.
Yeah.
Agreed. So let's move on so we've researched that cemetery. Definitely if you're at the state library or archives, they usually will have things like this. Step 4 is to learn the state statutes. Okay, what were you guys talking about these state statutes and laws about these cemeteries and access? So help us out here.
Yeah, well, there's a variety of ways that this is impactful. Some of which Michael was getting into. What happens even if it was not a private cemetery to begin with? What happens if it was a for-profit one that goes out of business? Or doesn't actually go out of business? And we had a case of this in Pennsylvania where it was sold along with, I guess it had never been fully deeded as a cemetery, and so it was sold to a private party, and people had bought burial lots to this quasi community cemetery, and then the new owners were telling them they couldn't bury there, and fortunately those people snarled loud enough to their state legislators that they passed a law to say, hey, you can't take away somebody's burial rights. But that's a state of Pennsylvania thing. There's going to be 50 different answers to that question, depending on where you live.
Right. So you want to find, especially, it's one thing if the cemetery is a public one, a relatively public one, and it's along a road. That makes access quite a bit easier. The issue is if you've got to go back on somebody's property to access that, or the access is an issue, and that's why you want to find out if it's a small one with a handful of stones. Try to find out where it's at. Look at maps to see who the adjacent property owners are, and gently reach out, to them. And you might even want to see, if you take pictures, you might want to say, I'm not going to publicly, I realize this may step on some toes, say, I'm not going to publicly post where this is at, because the landowner might not want people coming out there on a regular, it was fine for you to come out and take pictures of what was there, but they might not want that happening on a regular basis.
And if it is still a farm field, I feel for the farmer in this type of instance that, they don't want crops trampled by people. So there may be times of the year where they're more amenable to access than other times. And that kind of case, I'm very sympathetic. And yeah, you work with the people.
And
Yeah.
probably saying I'm willing to photograph them all so other people can see the images, because the flip
That they
side of
won't
that,
have to come in most cases.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, you know,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep. That's
Are
working for the
owners of,
community.
when there's burials on private land, are owners allowed to just dig it up?
Well,
I
there's allowed, and then there's allowed. I mean, technically, I am pretty sure, and again, this would be a state by state thing, but I'm pretty sure there are laws against that,
yeah.
but it's very difficult to enforce if they just, because a lot of these things they just do, they don't petition the court to say, oh, I have a need to move this. Now, businesses, and I've run into this, and even churches that want to move stones, they generally will go through the court process, and people are given a chance to object. There was one case. It wasn't a direct relative of mine, but somebody, the church. It was two churches, the cemetery in between them, and they were trying to clean that out to have this nice lawn. And apparently they got no response from everybody except three descendants of three different stones, people who were on three different stones. And so for a long time, it's like, here are these three oddball stones that are in the middle of the lawn. But
Very interesting. So you brought up a really good point that court records are a good place to look for possible movement of cemeteries. Yeah, yeah. So let's see. That's learn the state statutes, and step 5 is then to document and share your findings. Of course, if you found a cemetery that no one knows about, what's the best way to maybe do that? Would you guys say?
You could post the images to Find a Grave or to Billion Graves. I would suggest you also reach out to the local historical genealogicals. They probably already have an inkling of it, but you never know. Reach out to them and say, you found this, you've made pictures, transcriptions, whatever, and be willing to share those. Don't just keep them for yourself. The main thing is to share it with others.
Exactly. So let's look at all the steps for off the beaten cemetery path. So step 1 is to find the cemetery. Look in all those death records, see what you can find. Step 2, does the cemetery still exist? Step 3, research the cemetery. Step 4, learn the state statutes. Step 5 is to document and share your findings. So I'd love to hear if you guys have any in the comments, if you could tell me of any cool ways that you found where the cemetery is.
Are we still here?
Oh, I was just going to text you. Did Shamele freeze or?
Nope. Sorry. I did freeze. I had a little technical issue going on.
Okay.
So no, guys, I really enjoyed that. Did you guys have any other final tips on cemeteries and going deeper?
Just look at every potential conceivable record. Just like when we're talking about immigration research, that you look for every American record of the immigrant ancestor and their children. In this case, every conceivable death record, go down a checklist.
Most definitely. Well, guys, thank you so much for that lovely, wonderful quick start. And I will see you guys on the other side.
On the other side.
Hello, how are you? How are you? Let's go ahead and get ready for our second quick start, which we will announce. Make sure that if you're here, I did not announce, who's here before the first quick start, which I normally do, but I'm going to do it next when we come back for our second quick start. So announce where you are, announce your genealogy groups in the chat. Thank you. All righty, welcome back to Genealogy Quick Start. Are you guys ready for our second quick start? Wow, I'm looking forward to this one myself because I know what I think I'm going to hear. I'm going to learn so much more from this amazing lady. But before we get started with our special guest, I did not announce who's here. I need to see who my buddies are. So, of course, we have Paula Moen from West Defford down the street. Hey, Paula, how you doing today? Hello, Linda Craig from Sun City Center, Florida. Hello, Denise Payne from the Netherlands. Always nice to have you. Hello, April Kelly Hill from Midlothian, Virginia. Virginia is special, okay? That's why I'll keep bringing these Virginia people on here. Hey, Quint, how you doing from Cleveland? Hello, Jean Lucas Allen from Collegeville, PA. She's the Mega Genealogy Group participant at AAGG in Philly and the Oggs Family Quest in Philly. Hi, Cassie Adams, also from AAGS, in Cleveland. She says hello to you, Quinn. Hello, Marguerite Kada Fletcher from Tennessee. Nice to have you. Hi, Anita Payne from Fayette County, Tennessee. This must be the Tennessee area of the chat. Hello, Blue Chip. Husbands in California. Okay. Hello, Patricia Yarbert Lamb from Oberlin. I love Oberlin. I just put pictures up of Oberlin on Facebook. You got to check it out. It's from 3 years ago. Were you in that picture, Patricia? Hey, guess what? My cousin Floyd Riley is here. Hey, cousin Floyd. Hello, Dean Henry from AAGG via Berwyn. Hello, Rhonda Adams from Cleveland. What's all these Cleveland folks being on here today? Is something special going on today that we have all these Cleveland people? Hello, Cynthia Gully from Plano, Texas. I was just in Texas. Hello. Did I say hi to Rhonda already? Hello, Rhonda Adams. Hello, Stacy Bennett Dwyer from Dallas, Texas. Hi, Kathy Wiseman. Hello. Oh, Blue Chip was the one told us about the WPA. Let's see. We have, hey, Joseph Roby from Philly. Nice to see you. Also, M. Marshall from Los Angeles. Cags. I hung out with Cags. I like Cags. Joseph has like every genealogy group. I don't have time to say them all, but he is a genealogy group junkie. Say hi to Joseph. Hello, Sandra Milton, another Cleveland person. Hello, M. Clay Clark from Detroit. And I think that's it. Patricia Southern, did I say your name already? Hello, Patricia. All right, you guys, we have an extra special guest today. I don't know if you guys noticed, I was kind of in a panic because she wasn't here. Guess where she was at? She was sitting hanging out with you guys. And guess what? Now she's here. Hello, Char.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
I cannot hear you.
Oh, you can't? So maybe check your volume on your, you might have muted it like I like to do all the time.
I still cannot hear anyone.
Still can't hear me yet?
Ah.
Let me see. Let me make sure I'm not muted. Nope, I'm not muted.
I'm going to take my headphone off.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right. Now I can't hear you though. So you have to maybe unplug your headset. Oh, it's not plugged in? Yeah, I can't hear you. Maybe have one ear on and one ear off. All right. 'Cause, 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 'cause Let's see. I cannot hear you. Do you have anything on? Nope. Oh, you had that little control on your nope on your headphones. No. Let us see. Um
Can you hear me now?
yes, I can hear you. Can you
I
hear
can't hear
me?
you.
You can?
Let me.
No, you can't hear me? No.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are
I
you
can't
able to
hear
hear
you.
me? Not yet. Apologies, guys. We'll get it together because it's meant for you guys to hear this wonderful
Let me see.
information.
Mute share. Ah, you're in. Okay.
Hello?
Everyone can see you. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
You can hear me, but I can't hear you.
Okay.
So let me see. Try again.
You
Can
guys,
you hear
thank
me
you for.
now?
I can hear you.
No,
Can you hear me? No.
I can't hear.
So, guys,
Let me
while
see.
we're waiting to get our technical
Uh,
stuff going, this is called After You Find the First Slave Owner or Enslaver. I would love to see in the chat any of you found the first enslaver. Um, yeah, have any of you found the first enslaver
settings,
or a
photo,
enslaver? And if you have, please put
default.
their name
Okay,
and location
default.
into the chat.
Hit set. Default.
Dean said that maybe you
Hello,
can.
hello.
Hello, can you hear me? I can hear you.
Ah, now I can hear you.
You can hear me? Yay!
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness.
No worries,
Okay,
no
that's good.
worries. Thank you so much for your patience. So, Shar,
Yes.
inhale and exhale. And one thing that we love to, first of all, thank you for your
Mhm.
time today. And thank
You're
you for
welcome.
coming to share this great information. Um, and one thing that we love to hear from our special guest is your 1 minute genealogy story. How did you get started? And when did you know that you were hooked?
I was hooked looking at roots, looking at Alex Haley. I never thought it was possible. And that Kuta Kinte stuff really sent me to the moon. And so I got hooked immediately.
Yeah, yeah, that happened for a lot of folks. That happened for a lot of folks.
Hmm.
So today, the quick start we're doing is after you find the last enslaver. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And so, step one is to locate the enslaver. So, did you want to provide some tips on how we might do that?
Yes, if you did your homework properly and you followed all of the genealogical research that you should have before you get to 1870, um, at least you have a good chance of identifying the slave owner if you don't already know through your family. Some people actually know that they were owned by a certain family. So what happened is that in 1870, you're at 1870, and my God, you found the slave owner. And in many cases, many people stop. They say, "Oh, I got him," and you know, and they just stop, But what they fail to realize, they could have been owned by so many more people, and that particular slave owner might have been the last one, but he was not. He might have been the last slave owner, but he was not the only slave owner. Um, and in particular, research that I did on the Kirby family. Um, the family only knew about Big Mama. Big Mama was born in slavery, and her name was Martha, but they call her Big Mama. And she was born in slavery, and she comes out of slavery, and she lives up until the 1930s. And so many family members said they had done genealogy, trying to get more information. But when I asked them when she actually died, they couldn't tell me. I said, "Oh, they did not do their homework. They did not do their homework. If she died in the 30s in Virginia, you should have a death certificate." So
Right.
anyway, so what happened is that they asked me, could I look into Big Mama? And Big Mama had left them a story, and
Mm.
which we all had. Big Mamas would leave us a story. Anyway, Big Mama's mom gave birth to 19 children, and most of them were sold away. Some ended up staying in Virginia, and Big Mama um, came up, or her mother came up with a song so they can remember the ones who were sold away.
Oh, that's
And
adorable.
and in that song was each one of their names. So that song was passed down to the current generation. It had no beat, it had no whatever, but it was names. And what happened, I had them tell me that, sing that song to me, and I wrote those names down. And I was able to locate not one slave owner, close to a dozen slave owners. And what happened at that last slave owner um, was in Halifax County. That's where the he Big Mama was owned. But what happened is that the slave owner had to research him. And that's what sometimes we forget. Once you find your people, you got to now research the actual slave owner. And
Hmm.
I followed his footsteps through time. And
Okay.
he came to Halifax County after it was had been a county for about 6 or 7 years. So
Okay.
Halifax started in 1752, 53, or something like that. He was in
Okay.
Fauquier County
Okay.
before then. And he sold some slaves, and he brought a couple slaves with him, and it happened to be Big Mama's mama
Oh.
that came along with she was a little girl with her mother. I was able to locate the church he attended in Fauquier County. Now he left Fauquier County in the late 1750s.
Okay. Are you going past step one?
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, yes, I am. Yes, I am.
So step one is to locate like the last enslaver,
Mhm.
right? And
Yes.
so, there's lots of different ways to do that.
Hmm.
Did you want me to show the schedules or is that for another step?
That's step two.
1850.
Yeah, 1850. You're gonna see 1860, 1850 slave schedule.
Okay, I'll show you that.
Mhm.
I'll bring that up. And so
Okay.
what is a slave schedule?
A slave schedule is any slave owner that had slaves in the 1850s and 1860. It was a special schedule that was with the census to show how many slaves. I only found very few that mention first names. Most of them just have the the gender and the age of the slave. And so my point was locating this one was that I dealing with the Kirby's, and happened to be that Big Mama stayed in the same county, the same town, the same place that her slave owner owned them. But I was looking for a Kirby person that will have at least 19 slaves, because Big Mama named her 19, you know,
Siblings. Yeah.
siblings, and so it was other Kirby's, but this was the only one that had enough to include Big Mama's family. The others had no more than two or three slaves, the other Kirby's, which happened to be Anderson Kirby's um, family, but he was the one who owned the most, and he happened to be the last slave owner.
Okay. Okay. So then 1850 census, once you find possible people from the 1870 census, this is another way using
Mhm.
these slave schedules to kind of prove that they were actually enslavers before you go down this path
I
of
was. I
Hmm.
would say mostly like a suspect slave owner because you really don't know whether they're using the last slave owner's surname or some other surname. So what I usually do is work out is having the suspects and I list them down.
Suspects. I like that. I
Yes.
like that. Because sometimes we just latch on and we claim
Uh,
people because of
mhm,
surnames, and
mhm.
they don't, it doesn't have anything to do with reality. Would you
Yes.
agree? Like, should
Mhm,
we, like, it happens, but how often? Like, I get this question all the time. How often does it happen? I always say it don't matter how often it
mhm,
happens.
mhm,
You need to research as if it does and as if it
mhm.
didn't. Would you agree?
Yes, yes. And also you have different dynamics when you're working in a city considered than a
Can you
rural area.
expound upon the different dynamics as far as surname taking, city versus rural?
Yes, in many of the cities that I have researched, enslaved people were domestic slaves. Some worked on farms, many worked in homes. And what happened, some of them were hired out. If they were hired out, they had a wider selection of what surname to pick when they got their freedom. So chances are, in the case where I do a lot of research in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a city, many of the enslaved people did not carry the last name of their last owner. I mean, their owner, because they might have liked the person they were hired out to. And they decided when they got their freedom, that's who. And then some of them fell in love with Abraham Lincoln, so they're going to be Lincoln. And some of them stayed, I think I like George too, and they his last name Washington. So you just don't know. They were more in tune to politics. Mostly they heard these, conversations, and they had all these names. And so they had a wide variety of names surnames they could name themselves. Unlike in the rural areas, um, plantations, slave owner owns lots and lots of land. They might not even see a neighbor, but once or twice a year during the holidays, um, and therefore they don't have at least a pool of surnames to pick from,
Mhm,
unless they were sold and they want to use their mother. They were sold away from their mother. They might want to use her slave owner's last
mhm.
name or something like that. But otherwise,
Okay.
they are in rural areas and confined into a certain area, and the only people they know are the slave owners, or they go to church with the slave owner. It's a different one.
Ah, like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so be fluid with, keep your options open. I think that's
Mm,
what the state of that
yes.
is. So let's move on to step two, which is to research the enslaver. So, we
Hmm.
found who this person is. We've been able to prove it some way through a deed, some kind of probate record,
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
And now you want to go deeper to research
Hmm.
the enslaver. So how do you go about that?
You're going to perform the same genealogical research that you did early on when you started, and you're going to go after vital statistics on the slave owner. You're going to research him as well as his wife, because you really don't know whether the wife owned the slaves and brought them in through her marriage, which and we call them dowry slaves, or the husband might have owned them. So you're going to research them both, and um, and to find out more about them, or more about their siblings, more about their parents, because they might have received their slaves through their parents, inherit them. Um, and then you're going to also look at the slave owners, associates, people he dealt with in the business world. You will see that through court records, and if he dies, even after slavery ended, and he dies, you want to see who was were his executives on his will, because they didn't just hook up after slavery. They knew each other way before then. And so therefore, they were his business partners, his neighbors. And chances are, when a neighbor died and he was a friend, you might want to purchase a couple slaves of his that you've been eyeing for
Yeah.
long, so you don't know until you do all the research. So you
So let's
want to
go
pay
back.
attention.
Let's go back to the enslaver part. And this, you have the marriage is really interesting,
Hmm.
because like you said, you never know where they could have come from. And
Hmm.
so you have this marriage record that you share, you
Hmm.
wanted to share.
Hmm.
Why is this marriage record important?
Well, this one is on Big Mama's father. And I want to explain to you why I decided this was important. to the viewers. Big Mama mother was owned by one slave owner, but her daddy was owned by another.
Mhm.
Going through the associates of her mother's slave owner, found out they had close relationship and kin to Big Mama's father's slave owner, because Big Mama's mother was owned by a person last name Dawson. But you can see they were carrying the Kirby last name. Once I
Mhm.
identified that Anderson Kirby was a possible slave owner, then of course I had to find the documentation for that. Um, Anderson Kirby owned Big Mama's grandmother, Retta Miller. That's what you see. Now watch the last name, Miller. She's owned by the Kirbys. Why does she have the last name Miller?
Mm.
When I researched Anderson Kirby's wife, Rebecca, her maiden name was Miller.
Mm.
I get into I go back and find out who her father is, looking at marriages, looking at newspaper articles. If you forget, we might not have showed up in the newspaper unless we ran away, but
Right.
they showed up in the newspaper a lot. And it
Right.
was an announcement of Rebecca Miller's wedding to Anderson Kirby. Her father name was mentioned. Her father had died a year before she got married,
Okay.
but he left her slaves. Just when she married, she would have these slaves, and it
So
happened to be Coleman, his mama, and his brother was left to Rebecca.
okay, so basically you're just doing that research of the enslaver. Let's move
Hmm.
on to step three. You said learn the laws of property. This is kind of the same from the
Yes.
last quick start. The laws always seem to play a
Yes.
part. Like, why is this important?
Well, in Virginia, you have black law, what we call black codes, and they are the laws of how you dealing with enslaved people, free black people, and Indians.
Mhm.
Listed as property, what they can do, what they cannot do, their movements, and how a owner can emancipate them, can he emancipate them, can he not emancipate them. All of that is in the codes, and you want to
Okay.
know that. And so that's what I mean about learn the laws and how it deals with your people, so that you can better understand what's going on.
Okay, okay. I think Finkelman might be, I can't remember the name. There's a book that's kind of pulls together all the laws from the southern states, and I think it's Finkelman. It's slave statutes or something like that.
Mhm.
Let's move on to the next step because you guys want to see some records. This is a really cool one. I can't wait. She tells us about this one. She says research the enslaver's family. So we
Mhm.
talked about that kind of
Mhm.
researching the wife, right?
Yes.
Did this Dodson record go? Is this one we want to show about for that step?
The Dawson, no, they're going to come underneath Chancery, the next
Okay.
step. Okay, the marriage, as I stated before, you want to get as much vital statistics on the enslaver, so you have a clear understanding who his family is, because when any family member died, he could have inherited from them. And you want to know about that, because it might have been your people that he inherit from this relative, whether it's his grandfather or his brothers, or or his parents. You want to know, and getting these vital statistic records. Now, as far if you go back far, when you get in Virginia before 18, before the end of slavery, you're going to get what you call a marriage bond. It's not going to mention who the parents are on that unless they put up the bond for the marriage. So the records that you see from 1865 to the present, it tells you who the parents are and of the person who's getting married. But before then, you do not see that. So it's other ways you want to look through will books to see whether on deeds whether he was given property by a relative, and sometime it would say, "I give my son, 1,000 acres," stuff like that.
Hmm. Hmm. So that's step four. And step five is to research the enslaver's associates. So you were
Yes,
alluding to that, the people who
yes.
were witnesses. And tell us a little
Mhm.
bit more about that and let me know when to show this Dotson record.
Okay. Um, in Virginia, we have what we call chancery records. They're early records, and in other states, I think y'all call it equity. Chancery handles deals with money, equity, in other states they call the same type of record. And what happened is anytime a dispute between a business partner or neighbors or family members or somebody didn't like what their share they got from an estate, they sued, and it ended up in chancery courts. And many slaves, I mean, we're all slaves were considered property. And so therefore, instead of coming after the house and coming out of coming and don't have a Mercedes to come after, we are the Mercedes. And so therefore, they coming after the slaves. And so they list them by name. And sometimes that might be the first time you ever get to see the names of them, because if the owner lived beyond 1865, when his land is probated, it might not list any slaves because they were free.
Yeah, we
So
kind of have that happy dance if they die before 1865, and
I,
it's sad, but it's life. It's helpful when that happens, right? Because they will
yes,
list them.
but I can tell you something. The Chancery records is they can start like in 1850, 1820, and the case go on for years. It might not end until, in particular with this family, until 1870. Guess what? Even though the slaves were free, their names were mentioned.
Ah,
So don't stop at 1865. Go into it and
okay.
take a peep and see for sure
So
that
speaking of taking a
yes,
peek,
mhm,
can I show our
yes,
record? Yeah,
yes.
here we go. So tell us what we're looking at.
You're looking at a this is the cover to the Chancery records and giving you basically handwritten of what's in there. You can see that this is, look at the year. It's at 18, what is it?
1854,
And what's up here? Up in the corner.
1810.
1810. So this is 1810, and this is going to be Elijah Dawson was named after his father, and this is his father, and he gets some of these slaves. So you'll see where it mentioned you can see one is named Anderson. That was a clue that I did not know when I found it, that one of the slaves who is Coleman's wife named Letty. Coleman was owned by the Anderson. Anderson was a good friend of the Dawson family, so they named one of their slaves after him, Anderson.
Mm,
Okay, and then you see where at the bottom they have them like Peggy, Charles. Reuben is one of Letty's children. Most of these children I was able to follow as adults, and then in 1870 they appeared as adults.
okay,
So you can
okay.
follow them. Once you get a name, you can really kind of follow them. If you know who got them, you can follow them.
So this
And
all of these people listed are the enslaved property on both sides.
here on this on the left hand side are it's people who are slaves. Especially you
Okay.
see parentheses like child,
Yes.
stuff like that. That clearly tells you. On the right hand side, those are usually people who are, if they're not executors, they might be the children of or the people who are named in, but they're
Okay.
usually free blacks. But they have the same, many of them, what happened with the enslaved people, many
Mm-hmm.
of them picked surnames that were listed there. They had prior relationship with these people before they were sold to the Dawsons.
Okay. Okay. Man, so these are chancery records and these are court records or equity record. They could be called equity records in other
Mhm.
places. I would
Yes.
never think to
Mhm,
look in equity records. So that's an
mhm,
amazing tip.
mhm.
And I think, was that the last step? And then
Uh,
after the last step is to document and share your findings.
yes.
So, Char, that is very helpful. Let's run
Mhm,
through these steps before we run out of time. So, after you find the last enslaver, you want to first, step one is locate the enslaver. Step two is then to do the research on this enslaver as if they're your own family. You want to learn the laws of property. Step four, research their family. Step five, then you want to research the enslaver's associates. And step 6 is to go ahead and document all of your findings. So in these last 15 seconds, Char, who is your favorite plantation cousin?
Favorite plantation cousin. Plantation
And if
cousin.
you don't say her name, she's going to be so upset. Of
I
course, it's Dr.
Dr.
Debbie
Don B.
Evans.
Yes. Hi, how you doing? How you doing?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yes,
can.
we can hear
I'm
you.
good. I'm
Yes.
good. I'm a surprise.
All right. Your
Okay.
surprise wave goodbye. I don't even have time to bring the guys on. So everybody say goodbye to Char
Okay.
and Dr. Debbie.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Michael and Jim. Don't you guys go anywhere.
Okay.